Welcome everyone to session 8 of our virtual learning series, Foundations in Psychedelic Assisted Therapy for Social Workers. My name is Heidi Allen, and I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Associate Professor here at Columbia University School of Social Work. Tonight's topic is Community and Support in Psychedelic Healing with Hanifa Nayo Washington. This learning series is brought to you by the Psychedelic Therapy Training Program at the Columbia University School of Social Work, in partnership with the Penn School of Nursing and with generous funding from the Stephen and Alexandra Cohen Foundation and the Joe and Sandy Sandberg Foundation. We're so happy to have you all here tonight.
And hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Stott. I'm the program manager for the Psychedelic Therapy Training Program here at the Columbia School of Social Work. Just a few administrative notes. As a reminder, this learning series is not intended to be a comprehensive training in providing psychedelic-assisted therapy, but to initiate dialogue and start building foundational knowledge in the field of social work. Notably, for the first time, we have a specific pharmacological drug paired with a specific therapy model under review for approval by the FDA. As social workers make up the largest segment of mental health providers in the United States, it's critical that our clients will have access to these emerging innovations in clinical practice. Also to note, again, with the exception of ketamine, these therapies are not yet available in the US outside of research setting. We bring you this content with the anticipated FDA rescheduling of MDMA and psilocybin in the coming years. With that, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator. Henry McConnell is an MSW candidate at Columbia University and a lead organizer of the Student Psychedelic Caucus. In his practicum work, he's provided ketamine-assisted therapy to a diverse range of nearly 70 clients so far this year. Henry is also a longtime volunteer at the Brooklyn Zen Center, a community centered at the intersection of Dharma and social justice. While his original plan was to become a Zen monk, Henry is excited to build new bridges of psychedelic healing that meet us where we are in our lives. And with that, I'll hand it over to Henry to introduce Hanifa.
Thank you so much, Brooke and Heidi, and hello, everybody. So Hanifa Nayo Washington, she, her, hers, is an award-winning social entrepreneur, healing and justice practitioner with 25 years of values-based nonprofit leadership. Hanifa, a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging group facilitator, Reiki master practitioner, and sacred activist, works at the intersection of mindfulness, placemaking, and social justice to cultivate organizations, gatherings, spaces, and experiences rooted in the values of beloved community. Hanifa is a founding team member and advisor on equity and training at Fireside Project, a nonprofit that is creating systemic change in the field of psychedelics in 3 key domains: safety, diversity, and equitable access. Through their psychedelic peer support line, Fireside Project has created a nationwide safety net that has substantially decreased 911 calls and hospitalizations, while also democratizing access to free, high-quality care. The line has received 11,000 calls since launching in April of 2021. In the winter of 2023, Hanifa joined the newly formed Psychedelic Health Equity Initiative as a co-lead investigator. The goal is to improve the lives of people who've been marginalized in our society by providing equitable access to effective psychedelic-assisted therapy, or PAT, that can help them lead healthier lives. Hanifa is also the co-founder and organizing principal of One Village Healing, an online BIPOC-centered healing, resilience, and psychedelic wellness space. Hanifa is a public speaker and performing artist. She has been featured in dozens of articles on psychedelics, equity, and sacred activism from essence to vice. Hanifa is a native of Detroit, Michigan. She currently lives in Portland, Oregon. And now some fun facts about Hanifa. Hanifa's favorite fruit is strawberries. Hanifa also sailed over 10,000 nautical miles on a replica of the infamous tall ship Amistad, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, serving as a deckhand, cook, and educator. Last but not least, Hanifa is working on launching a podcast in the summer of 2023. So I hope you'll all join me in giving a warm welcome to Hanifa Nayo Washington for tonight's event.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Henry and Brooke, as well as Heidi, for welcoming me to this evening or afternoon's session. I'd really like to start off with a little bit of mindfulness, is a way of practicing what I preach, a way of arriving together, slowing down and dropping in. So if it feels comfortable and good to you and your body, I invite you to scooch your bottom to the edge of your seat, allowing some straightness in the back. Knees at a 90-degree angle again, if that is good for you and your body. And just take a deep breath and let it out. If it feels good, you can gently close your eyes. Sometimes I invite people to even take their glasses off to give the face a break. And just become aware of your breath. Notice where you're breathing in, where you're breathing out. And if it feels good to you, I just invite you to fully exhale from the lungs out of the mouth. And then breathe in through the nose. And exhale from the mouth like you're blowing out candles. And follow this breathing process for the next minute. I'll mind the time. Just at your own pace, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth like you're blowing out candles. With each exhalation, allowing your shoulders to drop just a little bit further away from your ears. If your mind begins to wander, just come back to the sensation of the air coming into the nose. And out of the mouth. And if it feels good and possible to you, I just invite you to allow a little tiny smile to come to the edge of your lips, the corners of your mouth. Just a little smile. Smiling to the inside. Signaling to all of the cells in your body. It's all good. Bringing your hands out in front of you, rubbing the hands together for some energy. A little faster. And then bringing this good love to some spot on your body that needs a little extra care right now. That's good and possible for you. Maybe it's your heart, maybe it's your eyes or the back of your neck. And the hands can melt down back to the lap. You can put your glasses back on. Adjust the body as you need to. Arriving here now. Once again, notice what feels different, what feels the same, what feels alive. I'd love to open up my sessions, regardless of what I'm doing, with some mindfulness. because I feel like it brings us all together in a certain way. It helps us slow down and be more present. And I think, isn't this is what life is about? To be in a relaxed, open state, to be at ease, to be aware. Many of the meetings that I'm in and talks that I give or sessions that I'm in, we're showing up to do the work to solve for the illness, to solve for the gaps, to put our minds together to create solutions. And let's remember why we're here, what we've shown up to do. Let's remember that there are many, many, many people suffering. We do not have this luxury. You don't remember the skill of mindfulness, of slowness, of ease. And so as we gather and as we learn and connect, let us remember the sweetness in this life and the commitment to service we've made to make this world a better place. When I think about the word community, it's one that I hear a lot. And I am somebody who, like many of you, would be nothing without community. From growing up as a small child in the church, my parents were also community organizers. From a very early age, I not only understood the word, but lived it and saw it and rested in it and was nurtured by community. And to me, community is a living thing. It is an actively evolving thing. It is a growing thing. And it is something that you give to and that you receive from. And within community, there are essential things. So there's mutual aid, right? So you're giving and taking, you're providing your skills and knowledge and sometimes goods and offerings. And in turn, when you might need it, you're receiving those things as well. There's transparency in community. So we're understanding exactly where the flow of energy is coming in and out of. We're understanding what our goals are as a community. We're understanding the roles and responsibilities. And we're also accountable in that community, accountable to what we've set out to do, what we said we would do, accountable to the folks who we are supporting, accountable to our own goals and our own standards as well. I think that community is also a place where we get to rest and to be in delight and joy as well. And when I think about the work that I've done across my life, from working, as a child in the church and that community, I've done a lot of traveling and have been an artist. I have, as you've heard, have sailed, 10,000 nautical miles on a tiny wooden ship. I have done all types of community service abroad with youth, doing building homes and creating gardens and building schools. I've I've done a lot of art and activism, and I've done a lot of healing work as well. And where I'm at now in my life within the psychedelic space, particularly in this very interesting time of what feels like mystical versus medical, though I think there's not a versus, and there's a great opportunity for bridge building. I look at this space and this community that is forming. There's all types of smaller communities and larger community forming, particularly when it comes to ensuring that there's an equitable path for all people to access these medicines. I think about communication, how we communicate with each other across the space. And it's one of the kind of calls to action, actually, that I have for folks coming into this field and this emerging field is, how are we going to communicate? How are we going to communicate what's happening? How are we going to communicate our needs? How are we going to communicate our challenges, the deltas? How are we going to communicate our successes? And who gets to communicate? I think that without clear communication, there's not clear listening happening, and we can fall into a lot of gaps. We can fall into our silos, which I see happening in the field right now. And so for me, one of the questions and reflections that I'm going to ask of you all later is to really reflect on, how are we communicating? How am I communicating? How can we create amazing new systems of communicating within this space? Because without that, I think we can miss each other and miss a lot, and miss building a community that is firm and has a clear foundation. Because without clear communication, we can't have accountability and we can't have transparency. I think that when I think about the psychedelic space and the work that I've been up to the past couple of years around psychedelic harm reduction and equity, some of the takeaways that I have, particularly working with Fireside Project, of which I'm a co-founding member, and now I serve as an equity and training advisor. I think about the things that really made it click, was how we communicate with each other, having a clear plan. But I think some of my biggest takeaways are, give it time. When we're creating community and we're building community, it's so important to give space, give time, not necessarily go slow, but give yourself more time than you think you might need to achieve a benchmark or get something completed. It's important because it takes stress off, as well as when you give yourself more time, there's more creativity and energy that can come into that process, and you never know where that's gonna take you. I think when I got the call from Joshua White, who is the founder and executive director of Fireside Project, when I got the call from him in August, it was August or September of 2020, we had met a year before at Burning Man. He called me and said, I have this idea, I've got this concept, I'm trying to bring it through, wanting to coordinate, bring together a group of advisors to help me with this thing. And I was like, oh, this sounds amazing. Of course, I would want to help. And so I joined the advisory group. And then as time was going forward, first Josh and I were talking like once every 2 weeks or something. And then it was like once a week. And then we were talking every day. And it just sort of organically formed in terms of like my involvement in the project so early on. And I think when we were really we just began to really move with it, there was this concept of, you know, what's the next thing? Every other day, it was just, you never knew where the project was going. It was moving very quickly. But even within that, I think for me, I was able to allow myself space and also give myself care. And I'm saying this as something when you're building something and building community, and you're in the space of like holding other people, it's so important to give yourself space for your own care and nurturing, however that might look to you. And for some folks, it might be, going on a vacation or taking a break or getting a massage or playing music, whatever that is for you. I think when I'm thinking about takeaways from helping to build a container and to build a community, so important to give yourself rest and to take that like seriously, very, very seriously. Another takeaway I think that I would share from the process of building community is that something I observed is that we are truly, truly stronger together. I think that people might think that's like a cliche term, but all of these different people coming together from different walks of life with different skills, particularly when I think about my time helping launch Fireside, there were many different people with many different skills who had different time commitments and different connections. But everyone, came together because there was a common need. There was a need that this was something like we all needed and wanted. And so we gave the different parts of ourselves to make this thing happen. And people came and went and, you ebb and flow. But in time, the community builds a foundation and builds a service that not only supports them, but everybody else, in the community. The volunteers at Fireside are some of the most amazing people I have ever met. So these are folks who dedicate a year of their life to work on the line, 4 hours every week. And it's the same shift usually. And they do a training that happens over the week, over 4 consecutive weekends or 2 consecutive weekends. And they show up slowly, ready to go, whether a call comes in or not. And that's another thing about give it time. In the early weeks and months of Fireside Project, we trained our first 25 volunteers, and very, very little calls were coming in, right? The first months and weeks. And so it was months and months before every single volunteer had one call. And then over time, word of mouth, also, we're figuring out ways to make the outreach work, more and more calls coming in, more and more calls coming in. Now Fireside Project has trained over 250 volunteers and, 11,000 calls have come through the line. And so again, it's just important to know that not all of the fruit is going to be, bared in the beginning. It takes time to build and to reach who you're trying to reach. I think that the Fireside Project is just a wonderful example and case study of some of the things that I've been involved with around community building that it exemplifies what it means to be of service and to not be expecting, right? And to not be expecting that you're going to get immediate praise or you're going to get all the calls or you're going to get all the action, but just showing up every week, holding that space, making it available for someone who might need that support or that care, is a true gift in itself. And so if there's any Fireside volunteers out there listening, shout out to you all. Love you so much. I wanted to talk a little bit about the promise of aftercare when you're talking about psychedelic healing and psychedelic community. Everybody is always jazzed about receiving the molecule, receiving the medicine, sort of being in the session. And we all know that one of the most important parts of the entire experience of a psychedelic experience is the aftercare and the processing that happens after you've had the experience, what people call integration. And so I think that there is a lot to be said around how we want to think about and hold those spaces of care, because people will return home from, whether it's MDMA or psilocybin therapy or sessions. They're going home, right? They're going home, or to where they might live, into environments that might not be, right, the most stable or accepting of those experiences. So I think it's a big question that we get to create awesome solutions for, in terms of how do we create healing spaces and community for folks within the medical model, in terms of aftercare. I think that then always, proper Fireside, the Fireside Project does offer, support for folks during and after any psychedelic experience. So there's a support line you can call to speak with somebody. And that's a wonderful resource. And I'm also thinking about, what are the institutions, what are the spaces and places that don't exist yet, that we get to create, that will hold people in community as they are navigating their experiences, their psychedelic experiences, after they've had a session. So are there drop-in centers? Are there other sorts of support lines? Are there spaces that exist within healthcare centers or centers that exist already? There's another organization that I helped to create back in 2019 called One Village Healing. And this is all about, one, it's an affinity healing space, so it's focused on Black folks, and it's about mindfulness and group healing and collective healing. So there's a session almost every day that's free. Now it's virtual because of the pandemic. We had to put everything online and decided to kind of keep it that way since 2020. But you can do, there's a Black men's top group, there's trap yoga, there's Reiki, and there's meditation, and there are other specialty sessions that we offer. These activities, mindfulness activities, we know are wonderful for integrating and processing. We know that meditation and mindfulness are wonderful tools to calm the body, keep the blood pressure low, bring in clarity and ease and healthfulness. And so I think when we were starting One Village Healing, it was something that we needed that didn't exist. A space where we could find Black practitioners offering Black people mindfulness and wellness. We weren't seeing this in our community, so we made it happen. And I think that more and more things like this, sort of centers like this and ideas like this, could be revolutionary to launch around the country, around every major city, right? To be like, here's a place where you can go and drop in. There are people there that look like you and understand what you're up to, understand your challenges and lived experiences. And and I think when I talk about affinity work, and affinity spaces, and we're talking about community and community building, to have healthy communities and healthy psychedelic healing spaces, we must think about affinity spaces, not only across racial and ethnic lines, but across gender lines, across many different intersections. And then also have spaces for, right, collective, whole community healing spaces. I think without those affinity spaces, we are doing an injustice to thinking that we can reach collective healing. Affinity spaces are so necessary. So I also want to, and I'll do these prompts again when we get to the reflection time, but I'm also, yeah, challenging you to think about, or inviting you to think about, what are some ways of being? What are some institutions or organizations that don't exist yet? What are some centers and spaces that we can create that can influence and encourage healing and wellness for folks as they're integrating and coming out of healing, coming out of psychedelic sessions and psychedelic uh, treatments? I think that we have a large opportunity to come up with some awesome solutions, and I'd love to invite your creativity to think about those things. I did want to just mention, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I did also want to talk a little bit about when it comes to understanding the psychedelic sort of bubble, I guess, or community space that we're creating now. We're seeing a lot of different things move, right? So we have these sort of state models that are happening, and Oregon and Colorado. We have obviously like the underground and the way people have been using plant medicines and psychedelics for thousands of years in sacred ceremony. We have these this, PAT, psychedelic assisted therapy, coming along, and there's a lot of tensions within all of this, and a lot of factions happening, which feels like antithetical to community, and understanding how we can all work together to move forward. And so for those of you who are coming into the space, for those who are the leaders and the gatekeepers, I just ask of you to, pause on your day-to-day and to think about the larger issue at hand, is that people are suffering. People are suffering, and that there are opportunities to lessen that suffering through access to these medicines in all of these different ways. And so instead of potentially being at war or indifference with each other, remember the suffering that's at hand and your role in helping to alleviate that. I'll end with a story of a significant experience that I had when I was coming out of a psychedelic experience, and I was sort of in this like nest. And in that space, my ancestors were coming to me, and my, you know, what if you want to call them, spirit guides and helpers. And they were just coming to me. No, there was no speaking, but there was just this energetic exchange. And it was just like, you're safe, you were whole, you're safe, you were whole. And it was so beautiful. I just was in what I call spirit tears. And I just remember sort of coming to a waking state and being just like my face was wet with the tears, and I was holding my heart center, and it was just so overwhelming that I started singing. I just started singing. I couldn't do anything else. And it all just felt so magical. And I will never forget the feeling and the essence of that. And I think there's something so beautiful that we have the opportunity to cultivate and protect as a community these magical feelings, these transformational moments in people's lives. And it's worth protecting also. So when I think about community and I think about our duty as community members, it's about this mutual aid. It's about the transparency and accountability. And in the psychedelic space and in psychedelic healing, it's also like our ability and responsibility to help protect these precious moments, and to help usher people into these spaces where they can potentially experience them. And so I invite you to think about what are some of the most precious moments in your life, with psychedelics or without them, and what it feels like to know that you can experience that that's even a possibility. And I want to take a pause here to just sort of take a little recap. That community is an important thing, and it requires our dedication to be in service. We can't do it by ourselves, and that we have the ability to create amazing things. Something like the Fireside Project that didn't exist one day. There was a vision and a dream for it. Josh pulled people together to make it happen. And now 11,000 souls later, this free service is in the world. And if you don't have the number on your phone, put it in there now. It's 623-473-7433 or 62 Fireside. It's open every day from 11 to 11 Pacific time. So you have no excuse. Tell a friend. It's also so important as you're building and creating things to take care of yourself. Like for real. And understanding that as we're building systems of care and community care, that we need to think about affinity spaces that welcome people who identify in different groups, to have space together to heal so that we can enter into the collective spaces more whole. And I think that those are my big points for now. I do want to take a moment to pause and to welcome you into welcome you into about 10 minutes of reflective space. And there are 2 questions that I invite you into. One of them is around imagining what are the systems or places or spaces that or organizations we might create for aftercare and community care after psychedelic experiences. And the other question I think that I had to ask was what spaces, places, organizations can you imagine that would support aftercare for psychedelic wellness? So when we think about folks, the many people that would come, for psychedelic therapy, and then are entering back into their communities, what are the spaces and places or organizations that we can imagine? What can they look like that would support psychedelic healing and wellness? I think that's a big enough question.
Yeah, especially thinking about how that intersects with the medical model, I think is it's a very complex. So look, I will sit here and journal, and I hope others do the same.
We are going to transition, I guess, into the Q&A and some share outs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Hanifa. I think you might have built some community for us just now, live. So I'm going to start with a question here from Tana Shadi. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Feel free to let me know if I'm not. So the question goes, love what you said about giving community space and agree. But how do we inch our way to supporting folks who feel deeply under-resourced of space and care resources to the point that only survival urgency reaction are what feels most accessible to their minds and bodies?
Absolutely hear that. I think from my perspective, right, we can only move at the speed of trust, and we can only move at the speed of resource. And so I think that when we're talking about these notions of building community and sort of having these larger resources to be able to be in a space, lavish spaces of rest and connection, we have to be always ever vigilant in reality too. I think that it is our work to be able to remember to bring these tools with us wherever we are, in times of ease as well as in times of duress. And so the practice of knowing that even in the middle of what conflict or dis-ease might be happening, I can pause and take a breath. I think we are trained to think that we can't because we don't deserve it or something in this manner. But I think that carry the tools with you. And I always say, like, breath is free. And so being able to take a minute to just scan the body and say, where am I breathing in this stressful moment right now? Am I breathing way up in my lungs and breathing really tight and shallow? I can pause and take a nice, deep, long breath. And of course, if we're physically in danger, right, we need to keep it moving. But I think there's often spaces when we're in disease and feeling under-resourced when we have more resources than we think.
I think that segues pretty nicely into a different direction, but a not unrelated concept about trust. So Amy writes here, can you talk a little about trust building, ways to enhance trust among communities who share different social positions or multiple identities embodying differing levels of power and privilege? And she's thinking here specifically in models of psychedelic use that are following more closely to a medical model of care with providers. How can trust be enhanced when there are these differentials and differences of identity all coming to bear?
I think we have some interesting opportunities to do some trust building, particularly with another facilitator or outside, like third party, especially when it comes to psychedelic assisted therapy, when we're getting into these really vulnerable and intimate spaces. There might be trust building that's done, with the facilitators and the seekers or the clients coming in. So for example, bringing in a group to do to talk about asking some key questions, especially around values and also like limits and boundaries. Sometimes these conversations are just had between the physician or the facilitators and the clients. And I think maybe having a third party come in that is neutral to either group to lead that discussion might be a good idea. I just want to make sure I'm answering the question. Was this was it trust between the facilitator and the client, or just in general?
I think that's what it was sounding like. Yeah, ways to enhance trust in communities who share different positions when they come into more of that medical model with the provider. It sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, I also think that there's also, honestly, I would say, kind of blowing up that whole idea. I'd say there just needs to be more energy and resource put into creating opportunities where there's more representation as well. Not because everybody or every that there's a monolith of identity, right? If people share the same type of identity, but there's less of a barrier to climb over when it comes to moving toward trust. And I think that I would personally put more energy into creating more representation than putting energy into trying to find understanding and understanding and explanation of each other by a third party. That's my hope and dream for the system.
Thank you for that, and I'll pivot with that to ask about your experiences with representation among volunteers as you built up the Fireside community and what that looked like. We have Chaim asking about, for instance, inclusivity for individuals who may not be able to do trainings on certain days because of religious obligations, and I'd be interested to hear you speak broadly about what the process has looked like to make sure that there is that representation on the volunteer side as you got the Fireside community up and running.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of factors that have been at play in terms of meeting meeting the needs of our volunteers, as well as meeting the needs of the support line itself. And so it's quite a matrix and quite a process. Right. So our very first cohort of volunteers are 25. We were open 4 days a week. It was all very experimental. And then as we grew, what we learned a lot of lessons, and I still are learning lessons. That first 10 months or so, we were open late at night, like from 12 p.m. to 3 a.m. And that we learned a lot of lessons, and it was very difficult to find volunteers to do that. So then we shifted. Our goal is to be 24 hours. The goal is to be 24 hours a day, 12 days a week. And we're now, every day from 11 to 11. And there's a lot of consideration that Fireside put into landing on those hours, as well as trying to make morning time slots available, as well as evening time slots. In terms of the training, it's a really tricky one. So it doesn't necessarily meet the needs of every single person and every single person's schedule. But as it is now, we receive for every slot there is available, we receive at least 12 to 15 applications. So every time we open the application pool, we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications. And so the process that we go through, one, we're looking for all types of availability when people can be scheduled on the line. We're looking for where people live, in terms of covering East Coast, West Coast, timing. We're also looking for understanding that, we have an equity initiative. So we have an initiative where callers who are transgender, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, BIPOC, as well as military veterans, that we want to give them choice to speak to someone who comes from their identity when they're processing or integrating a psychedelic experience. So we have a mind towards those demographics when we're looking to populate our volunteer pool as well. So there's it's a whole matrix that we're looking at when we are looking to fill the line. And yeah, we've gotten some feedback that, doing our trainings on the weekend is not conducive to some folks, or that's certain times that the line is open doesn't work for folks. But in general, we feel like we have a fairly broad and open process, and we try to be transparent with people when they apply, like what our parameters are and what our capacity is.
Sounds comprehensive matrix, like you said. So I have another response here from Tanashati, and she says, from the reflection prompt, my idea is aftercare homes, especially for people that don't yet have strong community that can offer that. I imagine meals offered, low stimulating environments, green spaces, optional activities like yoga, a sauna, a steam room. Also, no mandate for reporting or professional obligation, even in spaces where the substance might not be yet legal. Thank you for the opportunity to dream this up.
That was beautiful. I love it. Can I come?
I want to come to.
I love that. Aftercare houses. Yes. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation around this, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Thanks so much.
So I'll jump in and basically let you know what I was thinking of when I was journaling. I was thinking about how separate the medical model is from other peer support efforts, even harm reduction specialists, peer specialists, are not always paid for by insurance, and are, even though they're doing incredibly life-saving work, the research continually shows how important they are at saving lives, they aren't really valued by the medical establishment. And how we'll probably see kind of two systems of care. One will be the formal, this is what psychedelic assisted therapy looks like. Here's your 3 or 4, maybe more sessions of integration, but then at some point there's closure, unless you're working with a therapist for long-term that does psychedelic assisted therapy. And yet that really misses the value of what you've been talking about here. All of the elements of community, mutual aid and support, growing together, affinity groups, finding strength in that unity. And it seems to me that there's a clear funding mechanism for the medical model. I mean, I think we all hope that health insurance will pay for it and that therefore it'll be less expensive, but it's not as clear where the funding will come from to bring communities together to support each other. And I'm thinking that, one way you could just have like a flyer in your clinic that says, here's previous, there's a non-moderated group of people who get together on Wednesday nights who have received therapy at this clinic. I think some clinics might even be hesitant to do that because then they would think that they needed to have a therapist there or some way of moderating it. But you can imagine there being some like referral, kind of how we refer to AA or NA. And you would want a community of people who are not all exactly at the same spot, right? Just like in recovery from substance use, you have people who've been sober for 20 years and 10 years and 5, and they all work together to have that support network. And so I can see something like that existing for psychedelic therapy in the community, and some really incredibly beautiful spaces being created. But what I'm not sure of is how people will find them and how the costs of supporting them will, like where that money will come from. And I wondered if you have seen any creative things that you think might be promises for the future, and ways that could look.
I think that there are, I think there are philanthropic dollars, but I also feel like there are ways to create, community-based, membership-based centers like this. So I've seen, many like wellness centers that are community-based and donation-based or member-based at a sliding scale. And I think that that kind of system could work where there are centers or houses or, we've been working with some already existing community centers that have space, and maybe it's, the first Tuesday night that, this space is dedicated to this type of healing space for integration support. So I think that that could be a way. I also feel like there could be, centers that are built from the ground up, particularly for this, that totally come from, that are also like, community led, as well as, leaning on the support of seed funding from whether it's philanthropic dollars or grants, to get them started. But when I think of the co-op model or the cooperative model, I think it could be applied to this. You think of farms that are cooperatives, you think that of grocery stores that are cooperatives, you think of, all types of businesses that are cooperatives. I think that that model could really lend itself well to something like this.
It's a beautiful reflection. There's been a lot of endurance co-op models. I think of the Park Slope Food Co-op in Brooklyn, or my Zen Center, where people are so invested, and that creates a real reciprocity. I think, like you spoke to early on in the conversation, sort of inherently built in if people are putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Mhm.
I'm curious to get your sense of how community can tie into safety. There's been a lot of talk recently about the risks of what happens behind the closed doors in the psychedelic therapy room, even when there are video recordings in certain cases, as with the MAPS trials. And I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the opportunities or challenges of community as a safety providing function for the actual experience, the actual psychedelic experience itself.
I think that safety and accountability are really at this time, like in the space, I feel like they get the least amount of time, and everyone knows it's serious and important, but in terms of like the entity or the institution that needs to exist to hold the accountability, where the buck stops, if you will, like doesn't really exist yet in the space. So so far it's been a lot of people calling it out and then articles being written, and so awareness comes to a head. And then there's a sort of social kind of what do you call it? Swirling is the word that comes to my mind, but sort of people just bringing it up and holding it so it doesn't get forgotten. But I haven't seen yet in the space like the entity that then holds and tracks and holds accountable and is the record keeper, for the harm. So I would hope that in these early years that type of entity becomes that it forms. So this would be the space where so it's less about the reporting, but it's about caring for those that are harmed, and then being able to be a place where you can see, find, research, hey, has my facilitator been involved in any sort of case or reporting, and as well as a group that offers reformation and care for the person or groups that are harming people, so to help them do better, be better, and but also taking them out of the system so that they're not continually harming people. Those are all my hopes and dreams. I think that's something that needs to exist. I know that there are different factions kind of having these conversations, but and maybe the group is forming, but I haven't seen or heard of it yet. I think that that it's just super important for people who are experiencing and seeing harm to continue to alert our media. That's the best that we have going for us now, and I think that it's important for there to be continual like at least like town hall meetings, right? Of the group or of this space to be like, these things happen, these things are happening. This is where this thing is now. I think what's easily happens is that there's a lot of buzz about something and then it sort of stops buzzing. And then people think that everything's great again. So it's just, I think that on a regular having something like town hall meetings around these things could be a way to stay informed, and for the community and for those who want to be involved in that community of awareness to have input until we see an organization emerge that's holding that work.
Thank you for that. And I believe Brooke has a question, if Brooke wants to come up.
So my question was just going to be, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on the specific language that kind of gets used. And so like I've heard certain people really want to shy away from, say, using the terminology harm reduction because there's like implicit harm, that's implied with that. And I'm just wondering, like, are things like that, do you feel like important in your practice and community building, or does some of it feel like semantics?
It feels like semantics to me. To me, I'm just like, are we doing the work? Like, are people being safe? What are we calling it? I don't care. It's just so sure. There's risk reduction, there's harm reduction. Use which one feels great to you. Just go do the work.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate having you with us tonight. I'm sure as people watch the videos that they'll be doing their own thinking, and your work will continue even when we're not together. So thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Everybody take care.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you so
Henry.
much.